Good evening, dear friends. I am very glad you have chosen to spend this quiet hour with Stories with Jane. There is something wonderfully mysterious about an old invitation, especially one that asks every guest to hide behind a mask. Have you ever attended a masquerade, or kept a dance card, theatre ticket, or invitation that carried a secret memory? Do tell us in the comments. Tonight, I am sending a warm welcome to our listeners in Pakistan, especially those settling in with a late cup of tea. You can also find these stories on Spotify through the link in the description. And if these gentle mysteries bring you comfort, do consider subscribing. Now draw the curtains, settle into your chair, and let us enter Ashcombe Hall. At 11 minutes past midnight, the orchestra stopped in the middle of a waltz. No musician could later explain why. The ballroom lights had failed only seconds before, leaving 200 masked guests motionless beneath the painted ceiling, and the chandeliers flickered back to life. Sir Adrian Vale was no longer standing beside the charity strongbox. He was found in the winter garden, seated upright beneath a dead orange tree, wearing a mask that did not belong to him. In his hand lay a torn strip of silver ribbon. Across the room, Miss Marple looked not at the body, but at the rainless footprints leading away from it. Someone at Ashcombe Hall had come to the ball already disguised. Chapter 1. The Mask with No Symbol. The invitation reached Miss Marple's cottage on a damp Tuesday in October 1937, tucked between a seed catalogue and a chimney sweeper's bill. It was ivory card, edged in silver, with the Ashcombe crest, a black swan beneath a broken crown. Masquerade ball in aid of the Ashcombe Children's Convalescent Fund, Miss Marple read. Below appeared an unusual instruction. Guests are requested to wear the mask enclosed. No substitute will be admitted. The mask was pale blue silk, with a white clover embroidered near the left temple. Inside, someone had written the number 47 in violet ink. Her nephew Raymond had once accused her of finding danger in innocent stationery. Miss Marple had replied that stationery, like people, was seldom entirely innocent. Ashcombe Hall stood 6 miles beyond St Mary Mead, a long grey house with Tudor chimneys and Georgian windows. By 8:30 on the evening of the ball, lanterns swung above a drive crowded with motor cars. Miss Marple arrived with Colonel and Mrs Bantry. Mrs Bantry wore a green mask marked with an acorn. The Colonel's red velvet mask bore a golden key. A footman compared each mask with a ledger before admitting them. "How very organised," Miss Marple murmured. "Sir Adrian organises everything," Mrs Bantry whispered, "except his family." Inside, the hall smelled of beeswax and damp wool. Sir Adrian Vale received his guests beneath the portrait of a disapproving ancestor. He was broad and silver-haired, with a stiff left leg and a manner that made gratitude seem compulsory. His black satin mask was edged in silver. "My dear Miss Marple, how kind of you to support our little cause. Children recover much better when they are properly looked after," she replied. For an instant, Sir Adrian's expression altered. "Yes," he said, "that is precisely the point." Beside him stood Lady Honoria Vale, 20 years younger than her husband, beautiful in a severe way. Her white gown was fastened with a sapphire brooch. Behind her hovered Clara Penfold, Sir Adrian's anxious young secretary. Mrs Bantry quietly identified the other guests: Sebastian Vale, the charming nephew with no money and expensive habits; Mrs Beatrice Wren, writer of poisonous society columns; Captain Roderick Fane, Sir Adrian's former business partner; Dr Elias March, the family physician who had brought his medical bag to the ball. The ballroom glittered with candles and silver ribbons. At the far end, the famous blue Ashcombe sapphire waited in a glass case to be auctioned at midnight. Miss Marple soon discovered that each mask's embroidered symbol indicated where its wearer had been seated and which entrance had been used. Clover guests came through the east door, roses through the main hall, keys through the terrace. It was an elaborate system, and therefore one that gave a clever person many opportunities to appear obedient. At 20 minutes past 10, rain struck the windows. Late arrivals hurried in with wet shoulders and darkened shoes. The footman checked every mask. Then the guest in the black swan mask entered. No name was announced. The stranger wore evening clothes beneath a grey cape. The black mask covered most of the face and had a narrow beak. There was no embroidered symbol at either temple. More curious still, the stranger's polished shoes were perfectly dry. Sir Adrian saw the black swan and went still. Lady Honoria's champagne glass touched her teeth. The stranger crossed the hall, leaned close to Sir Adrian, and spoke too softly for anyone else to hear. Sir Adrian's face darkened. "You have no right to be here." The answer came in a voice blurred by the music. "Rights are fragile things, Adrian, especially borrowed ones." Sebastian stepped between them with a laugh that was too loud. "Uncle, the donors are waiting." Sir Adrian straightened. "At midnight," he told the stranger, "not before." The black swan bowed and moved away. The right arm remained unusually close to the body. A woman hiding a man's stride, perhaps, or a man hiding an injury. An old-fashioned violet perfume lingered behind. Clara Penfold appeared beside Miss Marple. "Have you seen Sir Adrian? He has taken the key." "The key to what?" Before Clara answered, a spoon struck a glass from the gallery. Sir Adrian stood above the ballroom, one hand on the silver rail. "My friends, before the auction, I intend to make an announcement concerning the convalescent fund. Certain accounts have been concealed, certain names have been protected. Tonight, that protection ends." A murmur crossed the room. Lady Honoria turned toward Dr. March. Sebastian's smile vanished. Captain Fane reached for a forbidden cigarette. "At 11 minutes past midnight," Sir Adrian continued, "I shall place the relevant documents in the strongbox for inspection by the trustees." The black swan stood directly beneath him. Slowly, the stranger drew one gloved finger across the throat. Sir Adrian left the gallery. At precisely 11 minutes past midnight, every light in Ashcombe Hall went out. Someone screamed. Glass shattered. In the darkness, Miss Marple heard a door close, the metallic snap of a spring, and a woman whisper, "You fool." The chandeliers returned less than half a minute later. The strongbox stood open. The documents were gone. So was Sir Adrian. They found him in the winter garden, seated beneath a dead orange tree. His own mask had been removed, and the black swan mask was tied across his face. A silver-handled letter opener protruded from his chest. In his hand lay a torn strip of silver ribbon. Wet footprints crossed the tiled floor toward the terrace. Everyone stared at them. Miss Marple studied the dead tree. Its dusty leaves had not been disturbed by rain. Then she bent over the nearest print. "They were made with water from inside the house," she said. Dr. March stared at her. Miss Marple looked back toward the ballroom. "The murderer was not trying to escape into the night," she said softly. "The murderer was trying to return to the party." Before the next chapter. Before we leave Ashcombe Hall, keep one troubling detail in mind. The mysterious guest entered with perfectly dry shoes, yet wet footprints were placed beside Sir Adrian's body. Which part was staged? The dry shoes, the wet footprints, or the masked stranger's arrival itself? And who was the woman Miss Marple heard whispering in the darkness? Share your theory in the comments, but do not trust the most obvious suspect. In Chapter 2, the doors of Ashcombe Hall will be locked, every mask will be counted, and the investigators will discover that one invited guest never arrived, although someone has been dancing under that guest's name all evening. Chapter 2. The guest who never arrived. The ballroom doors were locked at 12 minutes past midnight. Colonel Bantry placed 2 footmen at the main entrance and another at the terrace. No guest was permitted to leave. The orchestra remained seated beneath the gallery, their instruments resting uselessly across their knees. Ashcombe Hall, which 10 minutes earlier had glittered with music and champagne, now seemed to have drawn a breath and refused to release it. Sir Adrian Vale's body remained in the winter garden under Dr. March's supervision. The black swan mask lay on a marble table. Without it, Sir Adrian looked smaller and much older. Inspector Edwin Lyle arrived from Market Basing shortly before 1 o'clock. He was a square, deliberate man with a rain-darkened coat and the expression of someone accustomed to hearing lies in comfortable rooms. He examined the open strongbox, then faced the ballroom. No one leaves until every person here has been identified. The footman's ledger was brought from the entrance table. Each mask had been numbered, assigned a symbol, and matched to a guest's name. Inspector Lyle read the entries while the guests removed their masks. Number 12, Golden Key, Colonel Arthur Bantry. Number 19, Green Acorn, Mrs. Dolly Bantry. Number 31, Silver Rose, Lady Honoria Vale. Number 47, White Clover, Miss Jane Marple. One by one, the names were checked. Miss Marple watched faces rather than masks. Relief, irritation, fear. People revealed a great deal when they believed they were merely waiting. Near the ballroom wall, Clara Penfold stood gripping an empty glass. Her bluebell mask hung from one wrist. "You said Sir Adrian had taken a key," Miss Marple reminded her. "The strongbox key. He kept it on a chain inside his waistcoat." "It was not found on him." Clara paled. "Then someone took it. Or he gave it to someone." Inspector Lyle called for silence. "There are 186 guests here. The ledger records 187 admissions." Sebastian Vale leaned against a pillar. "Then your murderer has left." "No," said Miss Marple. Several people turned. The doors were watched after the lights returned, and the terrace footprints were made from inside. "It seems more likely that one guest entered twice, or entered under two identities," Lyle said. The chief footman, Mr. Pritchard, was summoned. He was a thin man with mournful cheeks, and a memory sharpened by 30 years of serving people who never noticed him. "Did anyone arrive without being announced?" Lyle asked. "Only the Black Swan, sir." "Was the mask checked?" "It had no number or symbol. I stopped the wearer, but Sir Adrian said, 'Let that one through.' The invitation was mine." Lady Honoria stiffened. "My husband mentioned no private invitation. Which invited guest failed to arrive?" Lyle asked. Pritchard consulted the list. "Miss Eleanor Quill, number 83, white moth mask." A woman near the fireplace gave a small cry. She wore a cream gown with seed pearls along the sleeves. In her hand was a white moth mask. "I am Eleanor Quill." Pritchard stared at her. "No, madam. I beg your pardon?" "Miss Quill attended the Ashcombe Garden fete for 6 years. You are not she." The silence that followed was broken only by the long case clock in the hall. Inspector Lyle crossed the room. "Your real name." The woman glanced towards Sebastian Vale. It lasted less than a second, but Miss Marple saw it. Sebastian saw that she had seen it. "My name is Margaret Dean." Mrs. Beatrice Wren leaned forward. "The actress?" Margaret Dean had once been famous on the London stage. 3 years earlier, after a scandal involving a married politician and a missing pearl necklace, she had disappeared from public life. Inspector Lyle held out his hand. "The invitation." Margaret produced an ivory card. It looked genuine, yet Miss Marple noticed that the broken crown above the black swan had 5 points. Her own had 7. "This is a copy," she said. Margaret's fingers tightened around the moth mask. "It was sent to me." "By whom?" "I don't know." Sebastian laughed. "Absurd." Margaret turned on him. "You knew I would be here." "I knew nothing of the sort. You wrote that Sir Adrian intended to confess what happened at Bellicombe." At the name, Dr. March dropped the silver instrument he had been cleaning. It struck the marble floor with a sharp sound. "What happened at Bellicombe?" Lyle asked. No one answered. At last Clara spoke. "It was the children's home before the Convalescent Fund bought it. There was a fire 18 years ago. Was anyone killed? One child was never accounted for." Inspector Lyle turned to Margaret. "Why would Sir Adrian confess to you?" "Because the missing child was my sister." A clock chimed 1:30. From above came the sound of a door closing. Colonel Bantry looked up. "I thought the upper floor had been cleared." "It was," said Pritchard. A thin line of dust fell from the painted ceiling. Miss Marple followed it with her eyes. Directly above the strongbox was a narrow servants' gallery concealed behind carved panels. "The murderer did not need to return through the ballroom," she said. "There was another way back." 2 constables searched upstairs. They returned carrying a woman's silver shoe, a coil of damp rope, and an envelope addressed to Miss Marple. Inside was a single card. In violet ink, it read, You have counted the masks, now count the dead. The clue to carry forward. Before we leave the locked ballroom, consider 3 details. Margaret Dane arrived with an imitation invitation, yet her white moth mask was genuine. Sir Adrian personally admitted the Black Swan, suggesting he knew the mysterious guest. And the message intended for Miss Marple was written in the same violet ink used to number her own mask. Was the warning prepared before the charity ball began? Someone inside Ashcombe Hall knew Miss Marple would attend. Someone expected Sir Adrian to die. And somewhere within the house, the real Eleanor Quill remained unaccounted for. But the most important clue may be the silver shoe found in the hidden gallery. It belonged to a woman, or perhaps it was placed there by someone who wished the police to believe that it did. In Chapter 3, the owner of the shoe will be identified, and Miss Marple will discover that the number written inside her mask was not 47 when it first left the maker's shop. Chapter 3. The number beneath the silk. The silver shoe was recognized before breakfast. Lady Honoria Vale identified it in the morning room at Ashcombe Hall, while rain pressed softly against the windows. It belongs to Clara Penfold. Clara, standing beside the cold fireplace, stared at Inspector Lyle. That is impossible. The shoe was narrow, high-heeled, and decorated with paste diamonds. Inside, written in faded pencil, were the initials CP. I owned a pair like that, Clara admitted, but I gave them away last spring. To whom? Lyle asked. To Mrs. Gedge, the housekeeper, for her niece. Mrs. Gedge was summoned. She was a broad woman whose black dress appeared capable of resisting scandal. The shoes were too small, she said. I put them in the charity collection. Where was it kept? In the old nursery passage. Anyone in the house might have taken them. Miss Marple sat near the window with her knitting untouched. The silver shoe had been damp when discovered, yet the dust in its seams remained pale and dry. It had not been worn through the wet gallery. It had been carried there. Clara, she asked, who knew the shoes had been yours? Most of the servants. Lady Honoria saw me wear them once. Lady Honoria's eyes sharpened. Are you accusing me? My dear, no. I am discovering whether the fact was private. Inspector Lyle placed the warning addressed to Miss Marple beside the shoe. Its violet writing had dried unevenly. Miss Marple compared it with the number inside her mask. Both were violet and slanted left, but the strokes differed. The person who wrote the warning did not number my mask, she said. Then why use the same ink? Lyle asked. To make us believe one hand was responsible for both. The masks had been supplied by Julian Preece, a London theatrical costumer. His invoice listed every number and symbol. Miss Marple's clover mask had originally been numbered 74. Someone at Ashcombe Hall had changed it to 47. Was 47 assigned elsewhere? She asked. Clara checked the invoice. No. Then the reversal was meant to be noticed. 74 becoming 47. A mirror number. Lady Honoria gave a faint laugh. Is that supposed to mean something? Not yet. The old nursery passage was searched. The charity collection lay behind a linen cupboard. Gowns, gloves, children's coats and shoes bundled into sacks. One sack had been cut open. A constable recovered the missing partner to Clara's shoe. Inside its toe was a dance card from the final ball held at Bellicombe Children's Home in 1919. Across the cover was written, "For Nora, who knew the locked door was not empty." Nora? Inspector Lyle asked. Lady Honoria's face drained of colour. My name before marriage was Nora Bell. Captain Roderick Fane, standing near the bookcase, turned away too quickly. So you attended the Bellicombe ball on the night of the fire? Lyle said. Many people did. And the locked door? I know nothing about it. Margaret Dane entered in a dark travelling dress, though no one had been permitted to leave. My sister mentioned a locked room in her last letter, she said. Lady Honoria rose. Your sister invented stories. She was 11. She was disturbed. Children invent dragons, Margaret replied. They do not usually invent paraffin beneath a door. Captain Fane struck the bookcase with his palm. That is enough. A book fell from an upper shelf. Behind it was a recess containing a brass key and an old photograph. The photograph showed 6 adults on the steps of Bellicombe: Sir Adrian, Captain Fane, Dr. March, the matron, and 2 others. At the edge stood Nora Bell, Lady Honoria, holding the hand of a small girl whose face had been scratched away. On the back, someone had written, "Eleanor." Inspector Lyle turned to Margaret. "Was that your sister?" "No. My sister's name was Lucy." Miss Marple examined the key. A grey thread clung to one tooth, and blue wax marked its bow. "The photograph was hidden recently," she said. "The key was not." Mrs. Gedge spoke from the doorway. "It opens the sealed room in the east wing." Lady Honoria stepped back. "That room has been locked since the Bellicombe records were moved here." "By whose order?" "Sir Adrian's." They crossed Ashcombe Hall in silence. The east wing smelled of plaster, cold stone, and long neglect. At the corridor's end stood a narrow blue door, wax pressed around its keyhole. The brass key fitted. Inside was a child's iron bed, a burned trunk, and shelves of Bellicombe account books. On the bed lay the missing white moth mask. Beneath it was a woman's body. Clara screamed. Margaret gripped the doorframe. Inspector Lyle approached, then stopped. The woman wore old-fashioned travelling clothes. Her face had the colourless stillness of wax, yet there was no decay and no smell of death. Dr. March touched her wrist. The woman's eyes opened. "Do not let Nora see me," she whispered. Miss Marple looked at Lady Honoria, but Lady Honoria was no longer in the corridor. She had vanished. The clue to carry forward. Remember the altered number inside Miss Marple's mask. 74 became 47. A deliberate reflection. Somewhere in this mystery, one identity may be the mirror image of another. The shoe was planted, the moth mask was hidden, and the woman in the sealed room knew Lady Honoria by her childhood name. But who was the scratched-out girl in the photograph? In Chapter 4, the woman will begin to speak. Before she can reveal who locked the Bellicombe children behind the blue door, someone will try to silence her without entering the room. Chapter 4. The Voice Behind the Wall. The woman in the sealed room called herself Eleanor Quill. She said it twice, as though the name had become difficult to possess. Dr. March ordered everyone back while he examined her. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair cut unevenly at the jaw, and a thin white scar beneath her left ear. Her pulse was weak, her pupils sluggish. "Chloral," he said. "A heavy dose, but not enough to kill her." "Not intended to kill," Miss Marple murmured, "only to keep her quiet until the ball was over." Eleanor watched her from the narrow bed. "You are Miss Marple." It was not a question. Inspector Lyle closed the blue door and stationed a constable outside. "Who brought you here?" "I came willingly." "When?" "Yesterday afternoon. I received a letter in Sir Adrian's hand. He said he had proof concerning Bellicombe and wished to make amends." "Was the letter genuine?" "I thought so." Eleanor's gaze moved to the burned trunk. "A woman met me at Ashcombe Station. She wore a dark veil. In the motor car she gave me brandy. I remember the blue door and someone saying that history was safer when it slept." "Did you recognize the voice?" Eleanor hesitated. "It belonged to someone who had once been kind to me." Before Lyle could press her, hurried steps sounded in the passage. Colonel Bantry appeared with Pritchard. Lady Honoria had not left the house. Her white satin mask had been found beside an open window in the west corridor, and one of the servants' staircases ended at a locked door. "The key is missing," Pritchard said. "Another performance," Margaret Dean remarked. "She wants us to think she has fled." Eleanor flinched at Margaret's voice. "You are Lucy's sister." Margaret moved to the bed. "You knew her. We shared a dormitory at Bellicombe. Then tell me who locked the door during the fire." Eleanor looked towards Captain Fane and Dr. March, who stood in the corridor. "Nora knew," she whispered. "Nora saw the person carrying the paraffin, but she was frightened, and Sir Adrian promised." A soft metallic click came from beneath the floor. Miss Marple's head lifted. The room filled with the faint scent of bitter almonds. Dr. March seized Eleanor and dragged her from the bed. Inspector Lyle kicked open the window, while Colonel Bantry pulled the scorched blankets into the corridor. Beneath the iron bed, concealed behind a wooden panel, a small gas jet had begun to burn with a blue flame. "Turn it off!" Dr. March shouted. "There is no tap here," said Lyle. Miss Marple knelt near the skirting board, covering her mouth with a handkerchief. A narrow copper pipe disappeared through the wall. "The supply is controlled elsewhere." Pritchard led them into the adjoining linen closet. Behind stacked sheets stood an old brass valve, recently polished by use. The valve was open. No one was inside. A length of black thread had been tied around its handle. It passed through a drilled hole in the cupboard door, crossed the passage at floor level, and vanished beneath the door of the disused schoolroom opposite. Inspector Lyle opened it. The thread ended at a heavy clock weight suspended from a chair. A candle had burned through the cord holding it. When the weight fell, it pulled the valve open. "The device was set hours ago," Lyle said. "Before the sealed room was opened," Miss Marple replied. "Whoever arranged it knew Eleanor would eventually be found and placed on that bed." Eleanor, wrapped in a blanket, stared at the open cupboard. That was how the fire began. Everyone turned. "At Bellicombe," she continued, "there was a smell before the flames. Not paraffin, gas. Someone had tied a cord to the laundry bell. Lucy found it and tried to warn the others." Margaret's face hardened. "And Nora cut the cord." Lady Honoria's voice came from the far end of the passage. "No, I cut the wrong one." She stood beneath the archway in a servant's black dress, her hair hidden under a maid's cap. In one hand she held the missing strongbox key. Inspector Lyle approached her. "Where have you been?" "In the old telephone room, listening." "To what?" "To the person who murdered my husband." She placed the key in his hand. "Sir Adrian arranged the midnight announcement because someone had been stealing from the convalescent fund. He believed the theft was connected to Bellicombe. Last week, he received a page torn from the old accounts." "Who sent it?" "I did." Captain Fane swore softly. Lady Honoria looked at Eleanor. "I did see a person near the laundry on the night of the fire. I was 16 and foolish. Sir Adrian told me the scandal would close the home and put every child on the street." He made silence sound like mercy. "Whom did you see?" Lyle asked. Before she could answer, a telephone rang somewhere behind the walls. Once, twice. Pritchard went pale. That line was disconnected 20 years ago. Lady Honoria pushed past him into the old telephone room. The others followed. A black receiver swung from its hook. On the desk lay the missing documents from Sir Adrian's strongbox. Across the top page, written in fresh violet ink, were 4 words: "Nora Lead. Ask the doctor." Dr. March stepped backwards. Then Eleanor gave a faint cry. The scar beneath her ear had begun to bleed. Miss Marple looked at the doctor's open medical bag. One small surgical knife was missing. The Ashcombe question. Someone prepared the gas mechanism before Eleanor was discovered. That person knew she would be placed in the sealed room and understood the forgotten workings of Ashcombe Hall. But there is another detail worth remembering. Dr. March immediately identified the drug in Eleanor's body, even though no bottle or glass had yet been found. Was that merely a physician's experience, or did he already know what she had been given? The message instructed them to ask the doctor, but it did not say which doctor. Bellicombe had employed another physician 18 years earlier, whose name has not yet appeared among the guests. And what caused Eleanor's old scar to bleed at the exact moment the surgical knife disappeared? In Chapter 5, Inspector Lyle will search Dr. March's medical bag. Miss Marple, however, will be far more interested in the disconnected telephone, because someone used it to ring from a room that officially does not exist. Chapter 5. The room that was not on the plan. Inspector Lyle emptied Dr. March's medical bag upon the telephone room desk. A stethoscope, 2 glass syringes, bandages, smelling salts, a silver thermometer, and 3 small bottles rolled across the blotting paper. There was also an empty leather slot, shaped precisely for a surgical knife. Dr. March watched with folded arms. "I brought the knife to cut away Sir Adrian's clothing." "And afterwards?" Lyle asked. "I cleaned it and returned it to the bag." "Who could have removed it?" "Anyone in that corridor." Margaret Dean gave a bitter laugh. "How fortunate." Lady Honoria stood near the disconnected telephone. Without her jewels and white gown, she seemed less like the mistress of Ashcombe Hall and more like the frightened girl in the Bellicum photograph. Eleanor Quill's bleeding had stopped. Dr. March insisted it came from scar tissue torn when she turned her head suddenly. Miss Marple was unconvinced. The wound had opened at the precise moment attention shifted towards the doctor. Accidents, she had observed, were often most useful when they happened on cue. Inspector Lyle examined the telephone. Its cord disappeared into a brass box fixed to the wall. From there, several wires travelled upwards through the plaster. Pritchard shook his head. The private exchange was removed in 1922. Those wires lead nowhere. Yet the bell rang, said Colonel Bantry. Miss Marple lifted the receiver. Instead of silence, she heard a faint, regular tapping. 3 taps, a pause. 2 taps, another pause. Someone is touching the line, she said. Lyle took the receiver, listened, and followed the wire with his eyes. It enters the wall behind that bookcase. The case appeared built into the panelling. Its shelves held old household directories, railway timetables, and bound copies of the Illustrated London News. 2 constables pulled at it without success. Miss Marple examined the floor. One corner of the rug had been folded beneath itself. On the polished board stood a crescent-shaped scrape. The case opens outwards, she said. Someone moved it recently and replaced the rug rather carelessly. Pritchard removed a volume labelled Household Accounts, 1912. Behind it was a small iron lever. The bookcase swung forward. Beyond it lay a narrow passage no wider than a coffin. A cold draught moved through the telephone room, carrying the smell of dust, candle grease, and violet perfume. Lady Honoria stepped back. I never knew this was here. Pritchard's face had turned grey. The old master used concealed passages during the war. Sir Adrian ordered them sealed. Apparently, Lyle said, he did not order them sealed very effectively. They entered one at a time. The passage descended 3 steps and curved behind the ballroom wall. At intervals, small round openings allowed a person to observe the rooms beyond without being seen. Through one, Miss Marple could see the strongbox. Through another, the winter garden. The murderer had not needed to cross either room openly. At the passage's end stood a low door, painted the same colour as the stone. No handle showed on their side. Colonel Bantry pushed it with his shoulder. It opened into darkness. The hidden room contained no windows and did not appear on any plan of Ashcombe Hall. A narrow cot stood against one wall. A telephone instrument rested on a packing case, connected to the old line. Beside it were candles, tinned food, a grey cape, and a small bottle of violet ink. The Black Swan guest had prepared a private refuge inside the house. On the floor lay a torn silver ribbon, matching the strip found in Sir Adrian's hand. Inspector Lyle picked it up with a handkerchief. So the murderer came here after the killing? Perhaps, Miss Marple said. He looked at her. You disagree. I think someone wished us to reach that conclusion. On the cot lay Dr. March's missing surgical knife. Its blade was stained with blood. Margaret Dean turned towards him. You tried to kill Eleanor. I have never seen this room. The knife says otherwise. The knife says someone took it from my bag. Lyle examined the blood without touching it. It may belong to Eleanor. It may not be human blood at all, Miss Marple said. Dr. March stared at her. She pointed to a wooden crate in the corner. Printed across its side were the words, Ashcombe Estate Veterinary Supplies. Inside lay cotton wool, empty medicine bottles, and a blood-stained cloth bearing several coarse black hairs. Horse blood, Colonel Bantry said. Most likely, Miss Marple replied. A theatrical touch, like the wet footprints. Lyle turned to Pritchard. Who knew of this room? The old footman hesitated. The late Mr. Vale knew, Sir Adrian's father, and the wartime staff. Names. Most are dead. Most? Pritchard looked towards the doorway. Mrs. Gedge worked here as a kitchen maid. The housekeeper was brought to the hidden room. She denied knowing anything about it until Lyle showed her the telephone. Then her composure broke. I only used it once, she said. When? Last night. The room seemed to contract around her. Who instructed you? Lyle asked. No one. I heard it ringing behind the pantry wall. A man's voice told me Lady Honoria was in danger. He said I must go to the west corridor and leave the servant's door unlocked. Did you recognize him? No, he whispered. Miss Marple studied the old telephone. A fine layer of dust covered its base, except for a clean circle beneath the receiver. How long did the conversation last? Perhaps a minute. And the bell rang before the lights failed. Mrs. Gedge nodded. At 5 minutes to midnight. Inspector Lyle frowned. The warning had been received 16 minutes before Sir Adrian's body was discovered. Miss Marple returned to the silver ribbon on the floor. One end was torn. The other had been cut cleanly with scissors. The ribbon in Sir Adrian's hand was torn from this piece. Lyle said. No, Miss Marple replied. It could not have been. She placed the two ends side by side. The weave did not match. Sir Adrian's ribbon was narrower and darker, aged by years rather than hours. It came from something old, she said. Perhaps a medal, a document, or a child's dress. Lady Honoria lowered herself onto the cot. At Bellicombe, the girls wore silver ribbons at the winter concert. Eleanor gripped the doorframe. Lucy wore one on the night of the fire. Before anyone could speak, 3 taps sounded from the telephone. Then 2, then 1. Pritchard crossed himself. Miss Marple lifted the receiver. A child's recorded voice whispered through the line. 7 became 4. The dead became 1. Look beneath the ballroom floor. The message ended with a sharp click. At that same moment, music began above them. A gramophone was playing the waltz that had stopped when the lights failed. Inspector Lyle rushed towards the passage. Miss Marple remained beside the telephone. On the mouthpiece, caught in a screw, was a single thread of green wool. Mrs. Gedge wore black. Dr. March wore grey. But Mrs. Bantry's evening cloak was green. The clue to carry forward. The hidden room explains how someone moved unseen between the ballroom, the winter garden, and the old telephone exchange. It does not prove that the Black Swan was the murderer. The surgical knife was planted with animal blood. The silver ribbon beside it was another false clue. Someone is not merely hiding evidence but manufacturing an entire solution for Inspector Lyle to discover. And consider the telephone warning received before Sir Adrian's death was discovered. Did the caller already know the murder would happen, or had Sir Adrian died earlier than everyone believed? The green thread may point towards Mrs. Bantry, but Miss Marple knows that loose fibres travel easily between friends, servants, and borrowed garments. In Chapter 6, the ballroom floor will be opened. Beneath it, the investigators will find a child's silver ribbon, a second strongbox, and proof that one of the masked guests attended Sir Adrian's funeral 18 years before he was murdered. Chapter 6. Beneath the Waltz. The gramophone stopped before Inspector Lyle reached the ballroom. Its needle remained on the spinning record, but the sound had ceased as neatly as if an invisible hand had lifted it. The guests watched from the walls while constables searched the musicians' platform, gallery, and curtained alcoves. No one was found. Mrs. Bantry stood beside Colonel Bantry in her green cloak. When Lyle showed her the thread from the hidden telephone, she examined it calmly. It may be mine. Half the ladies borrowed that cloak during the rain. Who borrowed it last night? Clara, Margaret Dean, and Lady Honoria. Miss Marple noticed one omission. You lent it to Eleanor at the garden fete in June, she said. Mrs. Bantry blinked. So I did. Eleanor Quill looked startled. I returned it before supper. Fibres are loyal little travellers, Miss Marple said. They remember places after people forget them. At 2:30, the ballroom carpet was rolled back. The voice on the telephone had said to look below, but the parquet showed no trapdoor. Colonel Bantry tapped the boards with his walking stick. Near the centre of the floor, one section answered with a hollow note. Pritchard fetched a pry bar. Beneath a square of parquet lay an iron compartment. Inside rested a child's silver ribbon, blackened at one edge. There was also a second strongbox. Unlike the ornamental box displayed at the ball, this one was old and scarred by heat. A brass plate on its lid read, Bellicombe Relief Trust, 1919. Lady Honoria covered her mouth. Sir Adrian told me it had been destroyed. The missing key recovered from her pocket fitted the lock. Inside were account ledgers, letters, and a photograph album wrapped in oilcloth. Its pages showed Bellicombe children at breakfast, in the garden, and performing beneath paper garlands. The last photograph showed a funeral. Sir Adrian stood beside an open grave, younger but unmistakable. Captain Fane and Dr. March were nearby. At the edge of the picture stood a figure wearing a black swan mask. "The photograph is dated January 1919, Lyle said. "So the mask was not invented for this ball," Margaret murmured. On the reverse, in faded violet ink, someone had written, "The first funeral was for the wrong child." Eleanor rose so quickly that her chair overturned. Lucy was buried under another name. Margaret seized her wrist. "What does that mean?" The children were confused after the fire. One girl was burned beyond recognition. "You told me Lucy escaped. I told you what I was told." "By whom?" Eleanor looked towards Dr. March. He seemed suddenly exhausted. "My father was Bellicombe's physician," he said. "I was a medical student and helped identify the body." "There was only one," Lady Honoria said. "Whose was it?" Dr. March did not answer. Lyle opened the letters. One envelope, sealed with blue wax, was addressed to Sir Adrian 3 days after the funeral. Inside was a single line. "You buried Lucy Dane, but Eleanor Quill is dead." Margaret struck Dr. March across the face. "You knew." "I suspected. My father made the identification. Sir Adrian ordered the grave sealed. When I questioned him, he threatened my career. You let me believe Lucy might be alive. I had no proof." Miss Marple watched Eleanor. The woman had not wept. She stared at the masked figure in the photograph as if recognizing it. "Who wore the black swan?" Miss Marple asked. Before Eleanor answered, every ballroom clock began to strike. One chimed 3 times, another 7. The gallery clock rang 4. From the hall came one heavy note. 3, 7, 4, 1. "An address?" Colonel Bantry asked. Miss Marple looked at the altered number inside her own mask. "Read them in reflection." Lyle reversed the sequence. 1, 4, 7, 3. Pritchard went pale. That was a Bellicombe Records code. The boxes were numbered by year and child. A scream came from beneath the musician's platform. A constable had found a narrow cellar stair. At its bottom stood numbered cabinets. Cabinet 1473 was open. Inside were birth certificates, adoption papers, and a hospital bracelet bearing the name Eleanor Quill. Behind them lay a recent newspaper clipping announcing Eleanor's death in Marseille 6 months earlier. Inspector Lyle turned towards the woman by the fire. The room became silent. The woman who called herself Eleanor stepped backwards. Margaret blocked her path. "Who are you?" The stranger reached beneath her collar and peeled away the strip covering the scar near her ear. There was no wound beneath it, only violet ink. The ballroom lights failed for the second time. In the darkness, someone whispered beside Miss Marple, "Do not let them open Lucy's grave." When the lights returned, the false Eleanor had vanished. On the floor lay Mrs. Bantry's green cloak, folded around the black swan mask. Miss Marple did not look at the passage doors. She looked at the cloak. Its hem was dry. Yet the stranger who had worn it moments earlier had left a wet handprint on Margaret's wrist. Someone had been waiting below the ballroom with water, a second cloak, and another carefully prepared escape. The clue to carry forward. The hidden strongbox proves that Bellicombe's only victim may have been buried under the wrong name. It also proves that the Black Swan existed 18 years before Sir Adrian's murder. But the false Eleanor knew Bellicombe, recognised Margaret, and feared the opening of Lucy's grave. She was not an ordinary impostor. Who sent the Marseille obituary? Why was Eleanor's hospital bracelet hidden at Ashcombe Hall? And who prepared the second disappearance beneath the ballroom? In Chapter 7, Lucy's grave will be opened before dawn. What lies inside will not be a child's remains, but an object stolen from Ashcombe Hall on the night Sir Adrian died. Chapter 7. The Grave That Held No Child. Lucy Dane's grave was opened at 20 minutes past 5 in the morning. The rain had stopped. leaving Bellicombe churchyard under a low white mist. Lanterns burned beside the yew trees, their flames dim against the approaching dawn. Inspector Lyle had obtained the vicar's reluctant permission, though the poor man remained at the lich gate, refusing to watch. Margaret Denny stood nearest the grave. No one had persuaded her to remain at Ashcombe Hall. "If Lucy is there," she said, "I shall know at last." Miss Marple looked at her with quiet compassion. "And if she is not?" Margaret did not answer. The coffin was small, blackened along one side, and secured by two rusted clasps. When the lid was lifted, Colonel Bantry removed his hat. There were no bones inside. Upon the decayed lining lay a silver music box. Lady Honoria made a strangled sound. That belonged to Sir Adrian's mother. The box had disappeared from Ashcombe Hall during the charity ball. Its theft had gone unnoticed in the confusion surrounding the murder. Inspector Lyle lifted it carefully. The enamel lid depicted a winter garden with an orange tree in bloom. Around its edge ran a band of tiny black swans. How did an object stolen last night come to be buried in a grave sealed 18 years ago? Colonel Bantry asked. The grave was not sealed, Miss Marple said. Fresh mud darkened the coffin lid. One screw was new. Someone had opened it within the past few hours. Lyle turned to the sexton. The old man swore no one had entered the churchyard after midnight. The gate had been chained, and he slept in the cottage overlooking the path. Then the person came another way, Miss Marple said. Behind the far wall, a narrow lane led towards Ashcombe's abandoned railway halt. Briars had been broken recently, and one stone in the wall bore a smear of violet wax. Margaret stared into the empty coffin. If Lucy was never buried here, where is she? Dr. March rubbed his eyes. My father's notes may explain it. You have had 18 years to find them, Margaret replied. I believed they were destroyed. Everyone at Ashcombe believes things are destroyed when it is convenient. Inspector Lyle opened the music box. Instead of music, a tiny mechanical voice spoke. At 10:30, the dead man was still alive. The recording clicked off. Sebastian Vale, who had been brought under guard, laughed uneasily. Well, that is helpful. We all saw him after 10:30. Miss Marple looked at him. Did we? Sir Adrian had appeared on the gallery before midnight, masked and speaking beneath the orchestra's music. The ballroom had been crowded. Most guests had seen his black evening coat, silver-edged mask, and stiff left leg. But a stiff leg could be imitated, a voice could be disguised, and a man could appear taller when viewed from below. Inspector Lyle's expression changed. If Sir Adrian died before the announcement, someone impersonated him. Lady Honoria shook her head. I spoke to Adrian in the library at 11. What did he say? That he had changed his mind about naming the thief publicly. He said the matter concerned an old debt. Did you see his face? He wore his mask. Did he touch you? No. Did he call you by name? Lady Honoria hesitated. He called me my dear. Miss Marple folded her hands. A phrase anyone might use. The doctor examined the music box. Its base contained a miniature wax cylinder, recently fitted. Beneath it was a compartment holding a torn piece of black fabric and a brass railway token stamped Bellicombe Halt. Pritchard recognized the cloth. Sir Adrian's evening coat had a tear beneath the left arm. The Black Swan guest had also held the right arm close to the body. Perhaps not to conceal an injury, Miss Marple thought, but to hide a badly fitting coat. At the old railway halt, the waiting room had collapsed long ago. A single length of track vanished into weeds. Near the platform stood a signalman's hut, its door fastened with new wire. Inside, they found a dressing mirror, grease paint, a silver-edged mask, and a pair of boots altered with a raised heel to imitate Sir Adrian's limp. On a nail hung a woman's dark wig. Inspector Lyle searched the drawers. One contained receipts from a theatrical costumer, all paid in cash. Another held several sheets of Ashcombe stationery. The final drawer was locked. Margaret took a hairpin from her hat and opened it before anyone stopped her. Inside lay a passport bearing her own photograph. The name beneath it was not Margaret Dean. It was Lucy Quill. She stared at the document as if it had struck her. That is not mine. Yet the photograph showed her unmistakably 10 years younger. Dr. March sank onto a chair. Then the records were reversed. Miss Marple looked at the empty grave, the false Eleanor, and the altered number inside her mask. 74 had become 47. Lucy Dean had become Lucy Quill. Eleanor Quill had become Eleanor Dean. Someone had exchanged the identities of 2 children after the fire. A whistle sounded outside. There had been no train on the Bellicombe line for 12 years. Inspector Lyle ran to the platform. Through the mist, a small inspection carriage rolled silently towards them, pushed by the slope. On its seat sat the false Eleanor, unconscious and bound with silver ribbon. Pinned to her coat was a card in violet ink. One sister remembers, the other sister lies. Margaret climbed into the carriage. The woman opened her eyes. This time, when she looked at Margaret, there was no fear, only recognition. "You were supposed to forget me," she whispered. Then she turned towards Miss Marple. Sir Adrian was dead before the first dance. The clue to carry forward. The music box has broken the accepted timeline. If Sir Adrian died before the ball truly began, every later sighting may have been part of an elaborate impersonation. The boots, mask, coat, and hidden railway hut show how the performance was prepared. But the passport suggests something even older. Lucy and Eleanor's identities were deliberately exchanged after the Bellicombe fire. Which woman is Margaret's sister? Who was buried under no name at all? And why was Sir Adrian's stolen music box placed in the empty grave only hours before it was opened? Most importantly, remember Lady Honoria's statement. She spoke to a masked Sir Adrian at 11, but he never called her Nora, the name her real husband used when they were alone. In Chapter 8, Dr. March will revise the time of death. The false Eleanor will reveal what she saw before the first dance, and one guest will be exposed as the person who stood on the gallery wearing a dead man's clothes. Chapter 8, The Dead Man on the Gallery. The false Eleanor regained consciousness in the signalman's hut shortly after 6. Inspector Lyle had her placed near the iron stove and guarded the only door. Margaret Dean sat opposite, studying the woman's face as though searching for a resemblance hidden beneath the years. "Your name," Lyle said. The woman held the blanket tightly around her shoulders. "Nell Quill." "Eleanor? I was called Nell at Bellicombe." Margaret leaned forward. "Were you my sister's friend?" Nell looked at her with sad patience. "I was your sister." Margaret rose so abruptly that the chair scraped backwards. "That is impossible." "Not by blood," Nell said. "By name." At Bellicombe, the youngest children had been paired as sisters, so that frightened newcomers would have someone to sleep beside, eat beside, and trust. Lucy Dane and Nell Quill had shared a room from the age of 7. After the fire, the surviving children had been separated before they could compare memories. "Someone changed our names," Nell said. "Lucy became Eleanor on the hospital papers. I became Lucy in the burial register." "But no child was buried," Margaret replied. "No, the coffin was empty from the beginning." Dr. March stood near the hut window. Dawn had made the glass pale behind him. "My father believed a body had been taken to the county hospital." "There was no body," Nell said. "There was a living child Sir Adrian wished everyone to consider dead." Miss Marple thought of the photograph with the scratched-out face. "Lucy survived the fire." "Yes. Where is she now?" Nell lowered her eyes. "I do not know." Inspector Lyle placed the music box on the table. "You said Sir Adrian was dead before the first dance. Explain." Nell had entered Ashcombe Hall through the concealed railway passage shortly after 9. She had been instructed to wait in the hidden room until Sir Adrian telephoned. "At 20 minutes to 10, I heard voices through the winter garden opening." "Whose voices?" "Sir Adrian's and a woman's." "Could you identify her?" "No. She spoke softly, but Sir Adrian called her an ungrateful child." Margaret's fingers closed around the back of her chair. What happened next? There was a crash. When I looked through the opening, Sir Adrian was lying beside the orange tree. A woman in long white gloves stood over him. "Lady Honoria wore white gloves," Sebastian said. "So did half the women at the ball," Miss Marple replied. Nell continued. The woman removed something from Sir Adrian's waistcoat, then she left through the ballroom door. "The strongbox key," Lyle said. Perhaps. And you did nothing?" "I was afraid. Sir Adrian had warned me that the police would arrest me for entering under a false name. Then someone entered the hidden room behind me." Nell remembered a cloth pressed over her face and the bitter sweetness of the drug. When she woke, she was imprisoned in the sealed East Wing room. Dr. March examined the music box again. If Sir Adrian died before 10, the body should have shown more advanced changes when I examined it after midnight. "Unless it had been kept somewhere cold," Miss Marple said. Ashcombe Hall possessed an old ice chamber beneath the winter garden. The entrance was hidden behind a tiled panel only a few yards from where the body had been discovered. Inspector Lyle sent 2 constables to search it. He then turned to Sebastian. "You appeared unusually certain that Sir Adrian was alive later." Sebastian's easy smile did not return. "I saw him." "No," Nell said. "You wore his clothes." Everyone looked at her. When the man stood on the gallery, his right hand touched the silver rail 3 times before he spoke. "Sebastian did the same thing at Bellicombe Station." "A nervous habit," Miss Marple said, "like a lady checking whether her pearls are still fastened." Sebastian stared towards the abandoned railway line. At last he sat down. "My uncle asked me to impersonate him." Lady Honoria's voice was cold. "When?" 2 days before the ball. He expected some unpleasantness concerning the accounts. He wanted the guests to believe he remained in public view while he met someone privately. "The Black Swan?" Lyle asked. Sebastian nodded. "I wore that mask when I arrived. It was our signal. After speaking to him in the hall, I entered the hidden passage and changed into his coat." "You made the gallery announcement?" "Yes." "And spoke to Lady Honoria in the library?" "Yes." Lady Honoria looked at him with disgust. "You called me my dear, because you did not know he called me Nora." Sebastian looked away. "Did you know Sir Adrian was dead?" Lyle asked. "No. The instructions had been left in the hidden room. I thought everything was proceeding as planned." "What instructions?" "Typewritten pages. Where to stand, what to say, when to open the strongbox." "Where are they now?" "Gone." Miss Marple watched him carefully. "You did not follow all of them." Sebastian's face changed. "The announcement was meant to be made at 11:30, she continued. "Yet you made it closer to midnight. Something delayed you." For several seconds, only the stove could be heard. "I found blood on the coat," Sebastian admitted. "Sir Adrian's blood? I did not know. The tear beneath the arm was wet. I panicked and went to the washroom. Someone had placed another coat there." Inspector Lyle approached him. "You knew something violent had happened, yet you continued." "My uncle promised to destroy my debts and name me his heir." "Was that promise written?" Sebastian nodded. "Signed?" "With his signet." "A signet can be borrowed," Miss Marple said. "And Clara Penfold had access to his typewriter, his stationery, and his private arrangements." The 2 constables returned from the ice chamber, carrying a blood-stained white glove and a silver tray. Upon the tray stood 6 champagne glasses. 5 were dusty. 1 had been recently washed. Dr. March lifted it towards the window. A faint violet mark circled the rim. Nell recoiled. "That was the glass given to me in the motor car." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "It was prepared to resemble it." Inside the glove, stitched into the lining, was the number 74, the original number of Miss Marple's mask. Inspector Lyle looked at her. "Someone expected you to find this." "Indeed." "Why involve you?" Miss Marple gazed towards Ashcombe Hall, barely visible beyond the mist. "Because the person arranging these clues does not merely want the truth discovered. That person wishes the truth discovered in a particular order." A railway bell rang outside. This time, no carriage appeared. Instead, a folded sheet slid beneath the hut door. Inspector Lyle opened it. It was a carbon copy of Sebastian's instructions. At the bottom appeared Sir Adrian's signature. Above it, in violet ink, someone had added, "The actor has confessed. Now ask who directed him." Miss Marple examined the paper. In the upper corner was the faint impression of a typed address. Miss Clara Penfold Bellicombe Cottage. Clara had told them she lived in Market Basing. She had lied. The clue to carry forward Sebastian was the man on the gallery and the masked Sir Adrian, who spoke to Lady Honoria. His confession removes every supposed sighting of Sir Adrian after 10 o'clock, but it does not prove Sebastian killed him. Someone supplied the substitute coat, moved the body through the ice chamber, planted the white glove, and directed Sebastian with instructions bearing Sir Adrian's signature. The address on the carbon copy links Clara Penfold to Bellicombe, yet a secretary skilled in typewriters would know that carbon impressions can betray their source. Did Clara make a careless mistake, or was her address deliberately placed there? In Chapter 9, Miss Marple will visit Bellicombe Cottage. Inside, she will find a child's bedroom preserved for 18 years, and a photograph proving Clara Penfold was present at the charity ball under 2 different masks. Chapter 9. The Cottage with 2 Mirrors. Bellicombe Cottage stood beyond the abandoned railway halt, hidden behind black yew and an orchard gone wild. The gate hung open. "Someone has been here before us," Inspector Lyle said. Miss Marple studied the soft gravel. A bicycle track crossed it beside 2 small shoe prints. "Or someone is expecting us." Clara Penfold's key opened the door. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and the violet perfume worn by the Black Swan. The sitting room seemed arranged rather than lived in. A sofa, 2 chairs, and a clock stopped at 11 minutes past midnight. Above the mantel hung silver ribbons embroidered around a black swan. Behind the frame lay a photograph of Clara beside Sir Adrian in the Ashcombe winter garden. His hand rested on her shoulder. "His daughter?" Colonel Bantry suggested. "Or someone he wished others to regard as one," Miss Marple said. Upstairs, Clara's bedroom contained modest dresses, careful accounts, and impersonal letters dictated by Sir Adrian. The second bedroom was locked. Lyle forced it. A child's room waited beyond, preserved as though its occupant might return before tea. Pencil marks recorded a girl's height from 8 to 12. Every mark was labelled Lucy. Margaret Dean touched the highest line. "My sister was 11 when Bellicombe burned." Then another child continued growing beneath Lucy's name, Miss Marple said. 2 mirrors faced one another above the dressing table. Between them lay a silver hairbrush engraved E.Q. Nell Quill entered under guard. On seeing the room, she caught the bedpost. "This was mine." She lifted a wooden rabbit. A brass key dropped from its hollow base. "My mother gave me this before Bellicombe." The key opened a cedar box beneath the bed. Inside were school reports, medical cards, and photographs spanning 18 years. The earliest showed a dark-haired child beside Sir Adrian. The last showed Clara Penfold. On its reverse, Sir Adrian had written, "Eleanor Quill, recovered." "Then Clara is Eleanor," Lyle said. "No," Miss Marple replied. "She was taught to answer to the name." The reports described Eleanor as a child who had lost her memory after the fire. Every payment for her care came from the Bellicombe Relief Trust. Dr. March examined the medical cards. "My father wrote these." The child had burns on her left shoulder. Nell drew back her collar. A pale burn crossed her skin. "The records belong to me." "Yet the photographs show Clara," Margaret said, "because the history and the child were separated. One girl received the past, another received the name. A wardrobe contained 2 ball gowns, 1 cream and 1 grey. In the cream gown lay a white moth mask. Beneath the grey cape was a black swan mask. Clara attended under both disguises, Lyle said. "Someone wore both," Miss Marple corrected. At the wardrobe's bottom lay a photograph taken during the ball. The clock showed 10:15. Clara, wearing her bluebell mask, stood beside the strongbox. In the gallery above her stood the white moth. 2 masks. 1 woman's face. "It proves she changed disguises," Lyle said. "It proves someone resembling her wore the moth mask." Miss Marple pointed to their hair. Clara's was parted on the left. The moth's was parted on the right. A mirror image. 74 becoming 47. Nell whispered, "Lucy." Footsteps sounded below. Lyle drew his revolver and ran downstairs. The front door stood open, though the constable outside had seen no one pass. The stopped clock was ticking. Its hands now pointed to 9:40. Beside it lay Clara's bluebell mask, wet with rain. A voice came from the kitchen. "Miss Marple?" Clara stood in the doorway, pale and muddy, with a bruise on her temple. "I escaped through the servants' tunnel. Someone locked me beneath Ashcombe Hall before the lights failed." "We saw you throughout the ball," Lyle replied. "No, you saw my sister." Nell became rigid. "That is not Lucy." "You knew me at Bellicombe," Clara said. "I knew a girl who called herself Lucy. You are not that girl." "Then who am I?" From upstairs came breaking glass. They found one facing mirror shattered. Across the other, in violet ink, were the words, "Neither sister knows her name." Behind the broken glass was a recess containing Sir Adrian's signet ring and blood-stained white gloves. "If they fit Clara, we have our woman in the winter garden," Lyle said. "Perhaps." Miss Marple examined the fragments. Most lay on the carpet, but one rested inside the recess. The mirror was broken from behind. A draught moved through the opening. Beyond it ran another narrow passage. Someone had written the message while they were downstairs. Someone was still inside the cottage. A door slammed below. By the time they reached the orchard, a bicycle was disappearing into the mist. On the gatepost hung a child's silver ribbon. Pinned to it was a fresh photograph of Clara, standing in the kitchen moments earlier. On the back was written, "One face entered, 2 faces will leave." Miss Marple turned the photograph towards the light. In the kitchen mirror behind Clara stood a second woman. She had Clara's face, and she was wearing Sir Adrian's black swan mask. The clue to carry forward Bellicombe Cottage proves that 2 women were given overlapping names, records, and appearances. Clara says her sister replaced her at the ball, while Nell insists Clara is not the Lucy she remembers. The signet ring could have authenticated Sebastian's instructions, and the gloves may belong to the woman beside Sir Adrian's body. Yet the passage allowed anyone to plant them. Most important is the clock reset to 9:40, the likely true time of death. Someone in the cottage knew the timeline was false. In Chapter 10, the blood on the gloves will reveal an unexpected victim. Clara's childhood will be tested, and Miss Marple will discover which mirror has been lying. Chapter 10. Which mirror lied? The blood-stained gloves were tested in the old dairy at Ashcombe Hall, where Inspector Lyle had established an evidence room. Dr. March worked beneath a hanging lamp, while Miss Marple, Clara Penfold, Nell Quill, Margaret Dean and Lady Honoria waited around the scrubbed table. Dawn had arrived, but the narrow windows admitted only a cold, grey light. "At least 2 kinds of blood are present," Dr. March said. "Sir Adrian's and Eleanor's?" Lyle asked. "No. One is animal blood, like that placed on my surgical knife. The other is human, but diluted with a chemical used to preserve laboratory specimens." Miss Marple looked at the white gloves. So it did not come directly from a wound. It was painted on. Inside the right cuff, someone had stitched the initials MD. Margaret Dean stared at them. "They are not mine." Lady Honoria examined the embroidery. "You wore gloves like these in The Venetian Widow. 12 years ago. Old costumes are remarkably patient," Miss Marple said. "They wait until someone requires an identity." Lyle asked where Margaret's theatrical costumes were stored. "At a London warehouse. Sir Adrian paid the fees after my scandal. His help always had a hook in it," Lady Honoria said. Sergeant Pike entered with a sealed laboratory report. The human blood had been typed. It matched Clara's. Clara went white. "I have no wound." Dr. March confirmed it. "Have you recently given blood?" Miss Marple asked. "Last month. Sir Adrian said the trustees required a medical examination." "Who took it?" "Dr. March." "I did no such thing," the doctor replied. Clara described a visit to Bellicombe Cottage by a man wearing spectacles, a dark moustache and gloves. He had asked about her childhood, shown her a wooden rabbit and a silver ribbon, then taken a vial of blood. "What else did he ask?" Miss Marple said. "Which Bellicombe bed was mine?" "I said the one nearest the window." Nell made a soft sound. "There was no bed near the window. The window was in the washroom." My room had yellow curtains, Clara insisted. The dormitory had green blinds. Their voices rose with the desperation of people defending not memories, but themselves. Miss Marple opened the cedar box from the cottage. Among the school reports was a child's drawing showing 4 beds, a stove, and a window beside the door. At the bottom, an adult had written, "Lucy remembers the dormitory." "Who drew this?" Lyle asked. "I did," Clara said. Miss Marple turned it over. Another picture had been traced faintly through the paper, with every object reversed. "A child copied it using a mirror," she said. Clara's face crumpled. The preserved bedroom, height marks, reports, and keepsakes had not protected her childhood. They had manufactured it. Lyle placed 2 photographs on the table, Clara beside Sir Adrian, and the masked woman reflected behind her at Bellicombe Cottage. The faces are nearly identical. "Nearly," Miss Marple said. She held a pocket mirror against the second photograph. Reflected again, the other woman's features altered. A mole appeared beside the left eyebrow rather than the right. The jaw was narrower, and the nose had been thickened with stage wax. "This is not Clara's twin. It is an actress made to resemble her." Margaret stiffened. "You think I did it? You possessed the skill," Lyle said. "So did every theatrical dresser in London." Miss Marple studied the black swan mask in the woman's hand. Its beak pointed towards the wrong shoulder. The photograph itself was reversed. The kitchen mirror had not shown someone behind Clara. 2 separate images had been combined by double exposure. Along the edge, Lyle found 2 overlapping negatives. One showed Clara in the cottage. The other showed the black swan figure in Ashcombe's winter garden. For the first time, the figure's shoes were visible. They were soft black slippers with reinforced toes, the footwear of an orchestra musician. The musicians remained detained in the servants' dining room. 12 had arrived. Only 11 were there now. The missing player was the second violinist, a quiet woman engaged through a London agency as Miss Grace Bell. Pritchard had never seen her before the ball. Nell had. "She worked at Bellicombe," she whispered. "She was the matron's assistant." Dr. March fetched the funeral photograph. Beside his father stood a young woman partly hidden by a veil, the same narrow jaw, the same mole. On the back, beneath the violet message, was a studio stamp, "Grace Bell, photographic assistant." Lady Honoria pressed both hands against the table. Grace Bell had no daughter at Bellicombe. "She did," Nell said, "but the child was registered under the matron's surname. Grace was unmarried. Sir Adrian promised to protect them both." Margaret looked at Clara. "Then, one of us may be Grace's child." "One of you was meant to believe so," Miss Marple replied. "That is not necessarily the same thing." The distinction settled over them more heavily than an accusation. "Not a guest," Miss Marple said. "Not a servant. Not anyone we were instructed to count." "The orchestra," Lyle murmured. A violin began playing somewhere above them. It was the unfinished waltz from the moment the lights had failed. They followed it to the gallery. No musician waited there. Beneath Sir Adrian's abandoned mask stood a violin case. Inside were Clara's missing vial of blood, stage wax, a false moustache, and a photograph of young Grace Bell holding the hand of the scratched-out child. Across it were written 3 words, "My daughter Lucy." Behind them, the ballroom doors locked with a heavy click. A woman's calm voice travelled through the speaking tube. "You have found the mother. Now find the child before the final dance." The clue: to carry forward. The gloves were intended to accuse Margaret, but the blood upon them belonged to Clara. Grace Bell had impersonated Dr. March weeks before the ball, gathering both Clara's blood and her childhood answers. Yet Grace did more than prepare evidence. She tested whether Clara truly remembered Bellicombe. Clara failed. The altered photographs, mirrored drawings, false records, and rehearsed memories suggest that someone has spent 18 years creating a daughter who may never have existed. But remember one important detail. Grace Bell's message said, "Find the child." She did not say, "Find my daughter." Has Grace been protecting Lucy, or hunting her? And while everyone searched the cottage and examined the gloves, no one asked where Mrs. Gedge had gone. In Chapter 11, the final dance will begin behind locked doors. One guest will be forced to remove a second face. The true purpose of the charity fund will be exposed, and Miss Marple will quietly name the person who killed Sir Adrian Vale. Chapter 11. The Final Dance. The ballroom doors would not open. Colonel Bantry pulled at the brass handles while Inspector Lyle examined the lock. There was no key and no bolt on their side. From beyond the walls came the first measured notes of a waltz. The orchestra remained under guard in the servants' dining room, yet the music grew louder. "Speaking tubes," Miss Marple said, "and another gramophone." Candles flared along the gallery. Beneath them stood 12 black swan masks, placed upon the rail like silent spectators. Grace Bell's voice travelled through the room. At Bellicombe, the children danced before they were counted. Tonight, the guests will be counted before they dance. Panels opened along the ballroom wall. Behind each waited a brass plate bearing a name: Sir Adrian Vale, Honoria Vale, Roderick Fane, Elias March, Margaret Dean, Clara Penfold, Eleanor Quill. The other plates bore the names of Bellicombe trustees long dead. "This is not a ball," Lady Honoria whispered. "No," said Miss Marple. "It is a trial." The chandeliers dimmed. A spotlight fell upon Mrs. Gedge at the head of the musicians' stair. She no longer wore her housekeeper's black dress. Beneath it was a faded grey uniform, embroidered with the letter B. Nell Quill stared at her. "Matron Gedge." "I was assistant matron," Mrs. Gedge said. "Grace Bell was the photographer and music teacher." "Where is Grace?" Lyle demanded. Mrs. Gedge looked towards the gallery. "Everywhere you were encouraged to look." A violinist stepped from behind the curtain. The woman called Grace Bell removed her spectacles, peeled stage wax from her jaw, and wiped away the mole above her brow. Then she removed her dark wig. Lady Honoria gave a low cry. "Miss Quill." The woman bowed. "Eleanor Quill, senior matron of Bellicombe." Inspector Lyle reached for his revolver. A metallic click sounded beneath the floor. "Do not," Eleanor said. "The old gas pipes are open." Miss Marple regarded her calmly. "You arranged the hidden room, the photographs, and the messages. I arranged the truth. You arranged a performance." Eleanor's smile vanished. Sir Adrian's charity, she explained, had never existed primarily for sick children. The convalescent fund bought properties, moved money through false medical accounts, and paid private allowances to Bellicombe survivors under new names. Sir Adrian called it protection. It was silence purchased annually. Captain Fane sank into a chair. The fund had also paid blackmail. Anyone who remembered the fire received money until they died, disappeared, or agreed to forget. Clara's employment was another payment, Eleanor continued. She was kept near Sir Adrian so he could watch what she remembered. Clara looked at Lady Honoria. "Who am I?" Mrs. Gedge answered. "You were not at Bellicombe. You were born 2 years after the fire. Grace Bell's child died in infancy. Sir Adrian brought you to the cottage and raised you inside another girl's memories. Why? To produce a witness he could control," Miss Marple said. "Clara would remember only what he taught her." Margaret turned to Nell. "Then Lucy?" "Lucy survived," Nell said. "Sir Adrian sent her away under Eleanor's name." "Where?" Eleanor pointed the violin bow towards Lady Honoria. "Nora knows." Lady Honoria lowered her eyes. "She was sent to Canada. I received one letter. Sir Adrian took it." "And the grave?" Lyle asked. "Empty from the beginning," Mrs. Gedge said. "The funeral made the death official." The waltz quickened. Eleanor descended the stairs. Sir Adrian destroyed children's lives and called it charity. Last night, he intended to expose the thefts, but only to blame dead trustees and preserve his name. "Is that why you killed him?" Lyle asked. "I did not." Miss Marple looked across the ballroom, the masks, the ribbons, the false blood, and the manufactured clues. "The person who killed Sir Adrian did not create this labyrinth," she said. "The murderer merely used it." She turned towards Mrs. Gedge. "You found him in the winter garden at 9:40. Mrs. Gedge began to tremble. "You received the telephone warning at 5 minutes to midnight, but that was not the first call. You omitted an earlier one. At 9:35, Sir Adrian telephoned from the Winter Garden, Miss Marple continued. He ordered you to bring the Bellicombe ledger and said the fund would be closed. You understood the payments supporting the survivors would end. Mrs. Gedge covered her face. He called the children parasites. I struck him with the music box, she whispered. Only once. He fell against the orange tree basin. There was blood. I thought he was dead. But the letter opener, Lyle asked. I never touched it. Dr. March moved towards the Winter Garden doors. Miss Marple stopped him with a glance. Sir Adrian was not dead when Mrs. Gedge left, she said. Someone else entered, found him injured, removed the strongbox key, and drove the letter opener into his chest. Lady Honoria's hand rose to her sapphire brooch. One sapphire was missing. Miss Marple looked at the silver handle of the weapon, sealed in an evidence box on Lyle's table. At its base was a tiny blue stone. Nora, Miss Marple said gently, you killed Sir Adrian Vale. Lady Honoria did not move. Then every candle went out. A woman screamed. When the emergency lamps rose, Lady Honoria was gone. On the floor lay the missing sapphire and a child's letter addressed in faded ink. To Nora, from Lucy, please come before he finds me. The postmark was dated 3 days earlier. Before the final chapter, Miss Marple has named Lady Honoria as Sir Adrian's killer, but one vital question remains. Did Nora stab her husband out of fear, revenge, or to protect the missing Lucy? The letter proves that Lucy was alive only 3 days before the charity ball. It also suggests that someone had found her after 18 years of secrecy. And consider the timing of Lady Honoria's disappearance. The ballroom was locked, the hidden passages were being watched, and Eleanor claimed control of the gas mechanism. Someone else must have helped Nora escape. In Chapter 12, the Black Swan will finally remove the last mask. Lucy's fate will be revealed, the Bellicombe fire will be reconstructed, and Miss Marple will explain why the murderer placed a ribbon in Sir Adrian's hand, along with the one simple clue that exposed the truth before the first dance had ended. Chapter 12, The Last Mask Removed. The final waltz continued after Lady Honoria disappeared. Its slow notes passed through the locked ballroom, while Inspector Lyle searched the gallery and Colonel Bantry examined the panels. Miss Marple remained beside the child's letter. The envelope had crossed the Atlantic, but the paper inside bore the watermark of a stationer in Market Basing. Lucy did not post this from Canada, she said. She wrote it after returning to England. A faint scrape sounded above the orchestra platform. Lyle pulled aside the velvet curtain. Behind it, a ladder climbed into the organ loft. At the top, a narrow panel stood open. They followed the passage to the Winter Garden. Lady Honoria waited beneath the dead orange tree. Beside her stood a slender woman in a black swan mask. The stranger removed it. Margaret Dean gripped the doorway. Lucy? The woman was near 30, with Margaret's dark eyes and a pale burn along one wrist. She looked not at Margaret, but at Nell Quill. Nell. Nell crossed the room and embraced her. For 18 years, Lucy Dean had lived in Quebec under the name Eleanor Quill. Sir Adrian's agents had paid her guardian, intercepted her letters, and persuaded her that everyone connected with Bellicombe was dead. 3 weeks earlier, the payments stopped. A man came to my house, Lucy said. He offered money if I signed a statement saying the fire had been an accident. I refused. Then I found Nora's address. Lady Honoria received Lucy's letter 3 days before the ball. She hid Lucy in the signalman's hut and agreed to help her confront Sir Adrian privately. But Eleanor found us, Lucy continued. The former matron stepped into the Winter Garden. I had searched for Lucy for years. When I learned of the charity ball, I turned Sir Adrian's passages and records against him. She had planned the masks, messages, recorded voices, and false clues to force every Bellicombe conspirator into one room. Mrs. Gedge helped with the house mechanisms. Nell agreed to appear as the missing Eleanor Quill. None had planned a murder. At 9:35, Mrs. Gedge said, Sir Adrian called me here. He had discovered that Eleanor copied the fund accounts. Sir Adrian declared that Bellicombe's survivors would receive nothing more. He mocked the children who still depended upon the payments. Mrs. Gedge struck him with the silver music box. When she fled, Lady Honoria entered carrying Lucy's letter, tied with the silver ribbon Lucy had worn at Bellicom's winter concert. Sir Adrian was conscious. He said he would have Lucy confined, Lady Honoria whispered. He said he had done it once and could do it again. She tried to reach the telephone. He caught the ribbon and tore it from the letter. Then he seized the silver-handled opener from the writing table. I took it from him. He laughed. Her hand shook. I stabbed him. Lucy moved closer, but Miss Marple raised one hand. And afterward, Eleanor found the body. Eleanor admitted it. She and Mrs. Gedge moved Sir Adrian into the ice chamber while Sebastian carried out the impersonation arranged by his uncle. Later, they returned the body to the winter garden, added the black swan mask, and placed wet footprints to protect Lady Honoria by suggesting an intruder. The false clues were not intended to hide the crime forever, Miss Marple said. They were intended to delay the police until Lucy could escape. Inspector Lyle looked at the former matron. You planted evidence against Dr. March, Margaret Dean, Clara, and Mrs. Bantry. I planted questions, Eleanor replied. You endangered Nell with gas. No, Nell said. The gas was never connected to the room. It released bitter almond scent from a theatrical canister. Dr. March assumed poison and pulled me out. Miss Marple nodded. An assumption Eleanor expected. The bleeding scar had been stage blood released by a wax capsule. The animal blood, reversed photographs, altered clocks, and false passport all served one purpose: to confuse identity and time until Bellicom's records were opened. But the fire, Margaret asked. Who began it? Lucy answered. Sir Adrian. In 1919, he had been stealing from the Relief Trust with his father and Captain Fane. Lucy found the duplicate accounts in the laundry office. Sir Adrian opened the gas line to destroy the papers and arranged a delayed cord mechanism. Nora saw him carrying the tools but cut the wrong cord. The fire spread before the dormitory could be cleared. Dr. March's father falsified the death record. Captain Fane transferred the money. Eleanor and Mrs. Gedge smuggled Lucy away, believing distance would keep her safe. Sir Adrian later separated them, changed Lucy's identity, and created an empty grave. Inspector Lyle faced Lady Honoria. You understand that I must arrest you? Yes. Lucy stepped forward. He was threatening her. That will be heard, Lyle said quietly. Miss Marple picked up the silver ribbon. This solved the matter sooner than all the masks, she said. Sir Adrian held an old ribbon, but the black swan wore new silver trimming. Therefore, the ribbon came from someone who approached him for a personal reason, connected with Bellicom. She looked at Lady Honoria's brooch. During the first dance, I saw one loose sapphire catch upon your glove. After the murder, it was missing. The stone was caught beneath the weapon's handle. A murderer may arrange footprints, masks, and clocks, but often forgets the small defect she sees every day. The ballroom doors opened at sunrise. As Lady Honoria was led away, Lucy took Margaret's hand for the first time. Behind them, Eleanor lifted the black swan masks from the gallery and dropped them one by one into the cold fireplace. Miss Marple watched the painted faces curl in the flame. Masks are rather like lies, she said. They conceal a face but must first be cut with 2 holes through which the truth can look out. After the last mask. And so the mystery of Ashcombe Hall ended not with one disguise removed, but many. Sebastian had worn Sir Adrian's clothes. Eleanor had hidden behind Grace Bell's face. Nell had carried another woman's name. Clara had been given memories that were never hers. Lady Honoria had lived for 18 years beneath the weight of her silence. Yet the smallest clue proved the strongest. A single loose sapphire noticed during a dance. Before you leave Ashcombe Hall, tell us in the comments, at what point did you begin to suspect Lady Honoria, and which clue misled you most? Thank you for spending this mystery with Stories with Jane. Until our next gathering, keep the lamps low, the tea warm, and remember that behind every carefully chosen mask, some fragment of the truth is always watching.